Thanks everybody for coming out tonight to the Rock County Historical Society Stonehouse. Newly renovated here. This is owned by the city, and all the renovation dollars went into, and restoration dollars were privately funded. So no taxpayer dollars have gone into making this building what it is today. I really appreciate the fact that Rich and Dwayne, former board members here at RCHS, approached me to be able to use the space for this important forum. And I'd like to acknowledge Jackie Wood as emeritus status on our board as well. So we've got some really good people here tonight. Appreciate time with these two fine gentlemen who we really don't get a lot of face time with regularly. So thank you very much for doing that. And thank you guys for putting this together.
Thanks.
Thank you again for attending tonight's Rock County Civics Academy program. Our ability to provide these presentations is solely dependent upon the financial support we receive from our sponsors and you, our faithful listeners. Our presenting sponsor is Havana Coffee on Milton Avenue. This program would not be possible without the ongoing support of the Italian House and Big Radio, WCLO, WJVL. Supporters include Ragnar Ltd. And Ragnar Software, the John Westfall family, Dan Plushik's Janesville News Report, American Awards and Promotions, Stockman Property Development LLC, Tim Lindow, Nowlin Law. If you believe in our mission, we welcome your financial support. Materials explaining our mission and financial support opportunities are available at the registration desk or by visiting our website, commonsenserockcounty.org. Rich?
Thank you, Paul. And welcome to the second half of our Civics Academy presentation for tonight. It's my pleasure to welcome City Manager Kevin Lehner, City of Janesville, and County Administrator Josh Smith, County of Rock. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you for having
you with us.
Thanks for having me.
You both are coming off of a challenging year. Kevin, you're new to the area, and you've now been in place for 7 months, probably?
About 7 months, yeah.
About 7 months, and let's start with you. In 7 months, you're now a walking encyclopedia of everything Janesville.
I wish I was.
What's the toughest thing that you learned in this first 7 months?
The toughest thing? I don't know that I would characterize anything as tough. The biggest thing I was probably disappointed in was the impacts of the new shared revenue formula on the city of Janesville. And the reason for that is I've been working on that, changing that formula for years, ever since pretty much I came back to the state of Wisconsin.
I was going to say, you and I talked this same conversation when you were in Burlington.
Yeah.
It's almost 100 years ago.
Yeah, it feels like it, yeah, about 18 years ago. And to have the legislation go through was very exciting, and it's very beneficial, but there are some things within the formula that are just inherently bad for the city of Janesville and the city of Eau Claire, and the two of us are some in the least helped boat when it came to that legislation. And so that excitement is great, and I'm happy for it, but there still needs to be reform done. So that was probably maybe the toughest thing I've learned so far.
And Josh, you're a veteran now of county government, and you've been the administrator for a few years. You're coming off of a challenging year, and I want to get what's the toughest thing out of the way early in the interview, because we want to get on to good stuff and focus on good stuff. What's the toughest thing you've had to deal with in this past year?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's just alone in this year, but with our cycle of every 2 years we get a new county board and 29 members, and some of you may have served on the county board before out there, and be watchers of the county board. And so, I think one of the most challenging things that we deal with is just trying to understand what it is every board expects out of us as staff, and what their approach to the budget is, for example. And I'm sure we'll talk about the budget. But really, I think it's just making sure that we're trying to meet the needs of the county board members, and as they're trying to meet the needs of those they represent in the county, and that's a challenging thing with so many members. And so, not necessarily this year, but every year that's a challenge.
I think if I were to characterize an even bigger challenge that the county faces, that the city doesn't have to deal with necessarily, and that's the county has such a broad sweep of services that you provide to the community that it's really hard for people to get their arms around. county government. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, not only that, I mean, people think about their local government, they think about their city, who is picking up their trash, and their local police services and all those things. And so county government, oftentimes people don't know what we do. There's quite a breadth of things. When you think about human services, our largest department, a lot of people in the past several years become much more familiar with public health during the pandemic. Of course, the sheriff's office has a lot of visibility, but things like the airport, the nursing home, not to mention our internal services, but the court system. We think about the courthouse and the court system, which includes the district attorney's office, and of course the courts and the clerk of courts. And so you go on with the list, and people just don't realize, I think, the breadth of different things that we do in the county. And certainly coming on the heels of the presentation by the schools, people do think about what are our priorities, right? I mean, schools and kids, right? And I think unfortunately for the county, we're left dealing with sometimes when things don't go as well with our youth. When you think about human services and child welfare and those kinds of things, and those things are certainly tough to deal with, and aren't always seen as much of a priority, I think. In some regards, and so yeah, there's a wide scope, and it's hard sometimes to get people to realize what everything we deal with.
Well, and it's interesting, if you turn the clock back a few years in Wisconsin, there was a point in time when the schools fell under the umbrella of the county, and I think that in somebody's infinite wisdom, it paid off to make people like Mark and Rich and Christy have their own set of problems, and you not have to deal with them too, Judge. Right?
There are still states where the schools are under the county umbrella, and so my colleagues in other states, the county administrators or the county executives, are responsible for the schools in the same way. They have people, like Mark, who are much more knowledgeable at the schools, probably actually running things, but that's still under the county umbrella.
It's interesting when you start doing the various layers of local government that have an impact on our lives, and you have the county, and then you have a layer of municipalities in there, from townships to villages to full-blown cities to class A, B, C cities. It just gets really complicated, and to do the overlay, I always have to ask the question, where's the overlapping responsibilities? And when you have those overlapping responsibilities, how do you work through those things? And it's a general question and kind of vague, but every time I see the county snowplow come down County Road A and it hits the city limits and then turns around and goes back, it speaks to me about shared services and common mission. How do you guys balance that out?
Well, I mean, from my view, I think that we always try to find ways to share responsibilities, and there's some clear examples of that. Countywide dispatch is a great example. That's a service that we can all share, and the county provides a great service to our communities by doing that. And then there's always the different types of partnerships that we can do together as well. And so I think that when you look at those sorts of things, that's what we're looking at. Now, a good example from the city side is that, we have contracted services to other townships to provide fire and EMS service. Those, again, a collective approach to solving the problems of the region, and that's where we can work together to do those sorts of things. The county's responsibilities are a little bit wider, and it tends to extend a lot more geographically and that sort of stuff, but we always look for things like that where we can partner together, and we've been doing all sorts of things for a long time.
Josh?
Yeah, I was just saying, snow plowing is a good example of where there's a road stops. But even then, we provide snowplow services for the majority of the towns in the county. We even have an agreement with Jefferson County where we could do a little bit of theirs because their road is easier to get to for us. We're driving by than it is for them. One example of an area where is clearly a county service, I mentioned human services, where we do look for opportunities to work together better. For example, we have a crisis worker, embedded with the Janesville Police Department, who just had an announcement come out today that we had an agreement with the city of Beloit to do the same thing that just happened. Clearly, mental health is a huge issue, and mental health in the schools is a huge issue, right? And so I'm sure there's opportunities there as well for us as we have this cadre of very professional mental health staff. So there's always those opportunities. You always think about things too, like, could the jurisdictions share administrative services, right? And from time to time, those things do come up, and and I'm sure we'll continue to explore those. But right there are lots of opportunities given you're in the same jurisdiction. But I think as Kevin says, there's always challenges, right? Given the scope and the geography and the greatest example is like policing services. We have the city of Janesville just has a new chief designate. I guess I'm not sure if it's official yet, but the sheriff's office, right? The sheriff is the sort of like the chief law enforcement officer under the Constitution. Those are overlapping, right? And so we do work together a lot on things with our other local law enforcement partners, and yet some people see that as duplicative in some way. Well, why? Because the sheriff might help patrol in the city of Janesville if they needed help, or they might drive through from somewhere else, and there's questions about, well, why is that happening? So it's certainly a fair question, and things that I know that we think and talk about quite a bit.
I know in my years of public service, both appointed and elected, we always tried to find those opportunities where we could create some economies of scale and sharing services. And so often it goes back to just the basic things that local governments do across the board. And this includes the schools and special districts and the cities and the county. Contracting for services, purchasing. We all buy computers, and we all buy paper, and we all buy ink, and we all buy food and other commodities, and yet we all have separate purchasing functions and central services, support functions for all of those things. We all have the need for specialized computer services, and yet there's so many opportunities. Why do we not see some really serious efforts to try and take advantage of those economies of scale opportunities?
Well, I could start. I think there's IT is a good example, and we've thought about this and talked about this before. As a matter of fact, I was talking to the Beloit City Manager just today, and a year or so ago, I was down at Beloit Rotary before Jerry came, and they asked me the same question. And I give the example I gave was IT. This would be an example of an administrative service that you could get economies of scale potentially. The hard part is, you have to make sure that if you're going to do that you're really getting the economies of scale you're talking about. So, for example, I use the example of earlier that there are counties with school districts in them. Well, they still have a superintendent, that has to actually run the schools. And so is there an economy of scale there of having under the county umbrella? Probably not really, right? You still got to have the same amount of staff. In the same way, for IT, you could have one IT director over, let's say, the city and the county, and there are places that do that. That have a consolidated place like that. Eau Claire might be one, if I'm thinking about it now. But do you have a staff savings, really? Because you still have to, if you're large enough, you still have to have somebody who oversees certain divisions and levels, and do you have really a savings there? So I think you have to pose the question, which is a great question that we do think about, but you have to make sure that the organizational fit is correct, and that you're sharing the same software, amongst, and that the integration doesn't cost more because now the county has to replace all that software, so we're on the same platform as the city, that we can achieve that scale, and that takes money and time too. So it's always a harder question than it would seem on its face.
And I think that, an important point is that shared service doesn't always mean reduced costs. So when we look at these sort of things, you're looking at it from a return on investment type perspective, and the restraints under which that the city operates and the county operates in terms of expenditure restraint and stuff like that. If there's a startup cost to something, we can't necessarily fund that sort of thing. But we do share services where it makes sense. A great example is that maybe most folks don't know about is that there are state contracts for purchasing that drive down the cost because collectively the state buys lots of stuff, and then cities and counties are able to glom onto those contracts and get things that they need. Cell phone service, salt is a big one that we jointly purchased. All sorts of things like that people don't understand. But whenever you look at those partnerships, it's always about trying to do the return on investment for the taxpayer as best we possibly can. And those sorts of partnerships are super important, and we'll continue to work on those where they make sense.
And I will say that in the most recent state budget, there was an incentive program put in place to try to provide funding to local governments that did consolidate and find savings, and Kevin and I have talked about trying to work on that when the rules come out, which we'll see when that is. It could be some time, but those are conversations that do occur.
Well, they should be ongoing conversations, and every opportunity that you have to share a service and find a way to create some economies of scale
Correct.
for the taxpayer is so important. In the very near future, we're going to be getting a letter, and for a lot of us, it'll come from the city of Janesville, and for others, it'll come from your principal municipality. And I like to refer to that letter as the annual love letter that comes from the governing boards, and it breaks down in kind of this fashion. You have a listing of who loves you the most, and typically on that list is going to be your school district loves you the most, followed by your major municipality, followed by the county, followed by the technical college, and then there's a little bit of love that Governor Evers and company provides for you. That's always that time when I go back and I try and evaluate what in the past year have I, as John or Joan Q. citizen, gained in terms of my quality of life. What are the highlights? What's made it exciting for me to be able to say, I'm going to write that check with a smile? And because next to the schools, you've got the biggest chunk thereafter. Let's start with you, Kevin. What are you going to do to tell me that, well, it's going to help me smile when I write that check?
Well, I always smile when I get the tax bill. But, I think that, the thing about it is it's not terribly exciting because cities do very basic functions that are closest to the people. And the number one thing and you start with is the community safe. And obviously we have a very safe community. We have one of the lowest crime rates that we've had in the history of the city of Janesville. We have very good fire and EMS service that provides very good response time. Very professional paramedic staff that provides those services. Those are essentially important. And then we're able to provide those sorts of things. Next thing on the next biggest part of the budget is public works. We're improving, roughly 12 miles of roads every year that are city owned, and then of course the partnerships that we have with the state on state highways, and the plowing service and those sorts of things that are there. The city provides you your garbage service. I've lived through a garbage strike. People get really upset when their garbage doesn't get picked up on a regular basis. I lived through a garbage strike in Texas in the heat of the summer. So if I can do that, I can do just about anything. And so those are the things that are just basic, and if you look at it, if you truly break it down, it's an incredible value for your dollar when it comes down to it. Folks a lot of times say that government should operate like a business. Well, I reject that premise on its face because governments are not business. What we do is inherently not profitable. That's why it's a government service. It's for the benefit of the entire community. And so we are innovative. We try to reduce costs. We try to share services. We try to raise revenue where we can, non-tax revenue where we can, because that's the best thing to do for the taxpayers. But what we do is not something that makes money. Right? We are providing a service for the benefit of the entire community. And so, Janesville is an incredible place. We've been great investments in our downtown, which makes it a dynamic place to be. We have an incredible park system. We have greatly connected trail system that makes it the quality of life here very, very high. And we should be very proud of that. And we're a growing community, and not every community can say that in this current environment.
Josh?
Well, I don't know that anybody other than Kevin, who smiles when they get their tax bill. So I try to convince you that you should smile when you get it. I think the difference between cities and counties, and you heard Kevin very well describe sort of like the quality of life and the benefit of the entire community of the things that cities do. Sometimes it's said that you don't know what a county does until you need the service. And so, it's hard for me to go in front of somebody and talk about our human services department in a way that if they've never had anybody involved in human services to say, we've reduced our at-home placements for kids, children and youth in child welfare system, by more than half over the last 7 years that, save money and it's better outcome for kids, and just the glass over, right? Because they've just never engaged in it, right? It's not the same thing as trash pickup, right? And so it's just not in the, it's not on their curb every day. And so it's hard sometimes to justify some of those things that the county does in a way that's there are benefits to the whole community because there are community effects when, there are children who aren't cared for, or when there are folks who are not behaving appropriately and should be in jail or whatever, right? There are effects in the entire community that people don't think about, but it's really much more direct for individuals who are experiencing those things at the time. So I think it's a harder case to make necessarily about the benefits of county services, just because people don't engage with them on as regular basis as you do with city services.
And I would add that for Josh's sake, that a lot of those things are mandated by the state. And in addition to telling them you have to do them, they tell you how you have to do them, which is an incredibly, complicated, and it's usually the hardest things to solve. I mean, running a jail is not easy, right? Providing health and human services to folks, mental health services, services to our aging population, incredibly difficult, and they deserve a lot of credit for what they have to do.
Josh knows that I have a bit of a deep background in counties, and I'm not even going to go there. My lecture would be, they're truly the administrative arm of the state of Wisconsin, and they do what they're told.
Mm-hmm.
And in Wisconsin in particular, you do what you're told. It's not like the great state of Iowa that we were able to get home rule that allowed us to do some things in a more creative fashion. But it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge.
It is a challenge, and when I go to, or every 2 weeks we have a new group of folks we hire. We have orientation, and I try to go and I try to have this very high level conversation about what does it mean to work for Rock County, and for people who have no idea, like they get a job with this department, and they're here, and I talk about things that I've started to share with you, things like the fact that we have a nursing home and an airport, and it's probably not very frequently where the nursing home folks are talking to the airport folks, right? And yet that's what we do. And all the mandated services we do and so forth and so on. And what I say is that it's not about like what we do as a county, it's how we do it. And we try to connect people with our mission and vision and our values in a way that helps people feel like they're part of the same organization, but are really very disparately spread and doing a lot of different things. And so, yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah. And you add to it the complicator in Wisconsin in particular, where you've got, by and large governing boards. Your county board of supervisors here is 29 members. In Dane County, it's 35 members. There was one point in time in history here that if you look back, Rock County had a 72-member county board of supervisors. And if you just think about that for a second, Josh, aren't you glad that you're working in the environment now as opposed to way back then?
It could always be worse. That's one of my mantras.
It
right?
could always be worse.
We're in pretty good shape.
Yeah. Every 2 years, the county board comes up for re-election. All 29 members are up for election. And when we start to hear about county primarily is when we start hearing or seeing coverage of county board meetings. And of late, the county board has garnered some headlines. Is that a positive or a negative, Josh?
Well, I mean, it can be both. I think on the one hand, it is good for the community to know what local government does, and so to the extent that they are learning what local government does, they're learning what the county does. That's a positive thing. So more coverage is better, and I think we're all in tune with the local media environment that's struggling as well, and so there's less coverage in local government than there used to be. So that's good. It depends on how people interpret and judge what's going on at the county level, and so I think people are passionate. We have a lot of passionate county board members, and that comes across as sometimes as dramatic and newsworthy, and whether that's good or bad, I guess, is in the eye of the beholder.
Well, it makes your job more interesting, if nothing else.
Interesting is the word that we use a lot to describe everything.
Yeah.
So we like that one.
One of the questions that came in from the audience, and again, I would remind folks that if you have questions, please, Paul has got question cards, fill them out, put down your question on paper. We'll do our darndest to get it into the panel and have them address it. And I'll try and paraphrase this one a little bit, but I'll give it the full breadth of what it is. With the lack of a newspaper in the area to keep the city and county accountable and a lack of transparency, why should the taxpayer trust government when not questioning fast-tracking the Woodland Center? So let's start to the root of that question. What can we do as governmental entities to do a better job of publicizing and letting the community know what we're doing? How do you promote and actively get citizen involvement so they know what's going on?
I think there's a variety of ways to do that, and I would argue with the premise of the question of fast tracking the Woodman Center. I mean, this thing's been talked about for more than 3 years, and there's been a variety of public forums and public input sessions on the Woodman Center, and there has been a large volume of publications that have been posted to the city website and a variety of other areas to inform the public on what those things are, as well as all the studies that we've done on it. And so I would say that is an example of an area where we can put the information out there. I think that that we can do more of is to hold different workshops and stuff around issues where there's not like an impending vote, to talk about things that are coming down the pike, to get input from our community. I think we're going to have a great opportunity to do that with the creation of a new strategic plan in 2024 for the city. And I think that is all those sorts of things that we can do. I just had a conversation with our communications team, now that we're fully staffed in that area, about the additional things that we're going to do to engage the public in the near future. And that includes enhancing our use of video to create more engagement, to meet people where they're at is really what is the terminology that I used with our team, and to really try hard to encourage those types of interactions. And I've got a long track record of doing those sorts of things, and I'm really proud of it, and I'm happy to bring that to James.
And I know one of the things that you did do in your previous employment was you hosted a local government get to know basics 101, 102 local government. An academy of sorts, not dissimilar than what we try to do with the Civics Academy.
Yep, we did one. We created one. It was a wonderfully successful program. People loved it. We exposed them to all our variety of issues and things in local government. And it really was really informative for the community. And I'm very proud to say that a number of those folks that went through the academy have become board members and even ran for council. And it continues to this day. So.
Well, and hopefully that's something that you're contemplating for this area as well.
Absolutely.
It's one of those things that are on your wish list now that you've got a full staff.
Yeah, well, 7 months in. Give me some time. We'll get it going, Rich.
Josh, what do you do for citizen participation, citizen involvement, and help the community know what the county government's doing? Why you're doing it?
Yeah, as we talked about before, it's hard, I think, for people to necessarily engage in county government. And Kevin kind of hit the nail on the head a little bit about communications and engagement. And that's something that, honestly, the county has always struggled with. We don't have any communication staff centrally. We have some staff in our human services department and our health department that are focused on communications, but we don't have any staff in our office centrally whose job it is to think about how do we communicate and engage with the public. And that is a problem, and it's just something we've never done. And the board has ranked that. We had a strategic planning session earlier this year, and they ranked that high as one of our biggest issues. So they did provide some funding for us to bring in a communications expert and try to help us do some things like think about videos and different ways to communicate with the public. If you think about youth these days and how the future generation of leaders is engaging, it is things like video, right, and social media, and I think that that is an area where we are deficient and we need to get better at, and it's just a matter of trying to find the time and the resources to do it. And I think ultimately, how you build trust is that you do things like this, where you are just present and you answer questions and you're just out in the community talking. And so I try to come whenever Rich asks or anybody asks to speak, because I think regardless of the questions, that's how you build trust, is just being present and answering questions.
Interesting thing about human nature is when our individual ox gets bored is typically when we decide we want to get involved and we want to get active and we want to understand what's going on. And it takes a lot to get people motivated to actually invest the time and the energy to figure out what in the world is Rock County doing, or what is the city of Janesville doing. How do you overcome that obstacle? How do you get people stimulated to have some level of interest? And I'll make an editorial comment just because I can. You've got 29-member board that's up for election in April, and I think in the last cycle there were only 10 or 12 of those races that were actually contested. There's a 7-member city council, and by golly, that hasn't been actively contested for a long time. How do you get people off the dime and into the boardroom?
We could spend an hour or more
Yeah.
on that question alone. So I think there's a lot of factors that influence that. Number one, we're in a world where we're self-selecting our news. The community newspapers continue to get smaller and smaller, cutting staffs. There's less relevant news in those types of forums, and people are not exposed to the information like they used to be, and so there's lack of engagement. The other thing that's impacting people running for office, quite frankly, is lack of civility. Folks don't want to do it. They don't want to be yelled at in a public forum. They don't want to be accused of things that he didn't do. They don't want to be lied about. And that can be very difficult. And the lack of civility in our public forums is sad for me. And I wish there was a way to restore it. And I clearly am one person that doesn't have that answer. But that, I think, detracts a lot of people. If you talk to somebody about running for council, one of the things they'll go, ugh, I don't want to deal with that, whatever that is, that's defined. And so I think that is a serious problem. What you can do to combat that is that, I think that my experience in Janesville is that our city council prides itself on open communication, even if they disagree with each other, and having a respectful debate, even if they disagree, even if it's a controversial issue, and they try really hard to maintain those standards and decorum within a city council meeting. I think that's really important. And then the other piece of that, I think, is continuing the engagement efforts and meeting people where they're at and talking about the value of being involved in your local government. Sometimes folks run that are really upset about something, and they end up being the very best council members you could possibly imagine. They get in and they learn, and they become huge advocates for your community, and that's great. But there's a lot of, I could spend hours talking about that topic.
Josh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know that I can say much better than Kevin did about the so-called polarization, I suppose, these days. And I would agree. I think that the comment I was going to make is that we've had a lot of people come out of county board meetings in the past year plus who are unhappy about things, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That it engages people to come out, they learn more about county government, and they do make change. Those people do make change, and so I would really encourage anybody who is interested, whether you're in favor or not of what's been going on, come out to a meeting and come up for your 2 minutes at the podium and just share what's on your mind. I didn't like this, I like that. The board loves to see that, and I think that even when it's not good, you will see at our county board meetings where a group of folks comes because they're passionate about an issue, even if they're mad and they're kind of uptight yelling at the county board. You will see county board members thank them for coming, right? And it's because that engagement is important no matter how they engage, and it does over the long term. That's what I think helps improve and gets more engagement. It's just people coming on.
There used to be a regular meeting of the administrators and managers that happened on a monthly or so basis, and this was years back, where the city managers and the county administrator would get together and you'd have a breakfast or a lunch, and you'd talk about common issues and try and find common solutions. And that over time kind of diminished into just a meeting between the county and the city of Janesville and the city of Beloit, and the outlying areas, they kind of fell off of that list, and now I understand it's gotten even smaller than that. Or are those meetings still going on where you have these real conversations about comparing notes? Because problem solving is an interesting concept. More bright people around the table come up with more solutions than just me saying it's my way or the highway.
Yeah. So ironically, tomorrow morning we have one of these meetings. We're having breakfast with typically invitees, cities of Janesville, Beloit, and the county, in addition to the administrators, managers, or leadership. Invited the city council president, so forth, and it's just what it is. It's just here's some things going on, just to kind of keep each other aware of, talk about issues that may be coming, things we can collaborate on. We talk about regularly too. So with both Kevin, being fairly new, and Jerry and Beloit, we just started those up again, kind of as the first shot at getting together yeah, as you said, Rich, I think those are important and are going well.
Mhm. Another question from the audience, and this one, I'm trying to stick as close to the script as I can. Who enforces state law in municipalities to deal with unlicensed dogs, and can you hire private organizations to do this and delegate that service out to somebody? The county has a role in that, the city has a role in that. You have a contract at the city level with the Humane Society
Yep.
to deal with dogs, but are we still dealing with cats too?
Dogs and cats, yeah, actually animals in general. But the focus, the contract is focused on dogs and cats primarily. And, the Humane Society will take in, stray dogs and stray cats. And our police department has the opportunity to bring dogs and cats that we collect there as well. And then there's the licensing that ultimately comes from the county down through the city.
How does the county coordinate all of that? And how do you keep us from going to the dogs?
Yeah, there's different roles that different counties play in animal control. We don't as a county, have a county-wide humane, kind of a humane animal control department here, like some other counties do. The role we play right now is, we have a humane officer at the sheriff's office who gets trained to go out on some calls, and we, coordinate with Humane Society, and then the underlying jurisdictions. We have a fund at the county level that we use to try to support some of those efforts, but it's not coordinated, centralized. There are other counties that do it that way, and it can work very well. And I think when it is, it probably works better a lot of times if it's organized and centralized. I think it's a matter of getting like any other public policy issue, right? You just have to have the timing is right, the people at the table are right to create, a more centralized version of that than we have right now. And we've talked about that in the last several years, I would say, and it just never took off. But it doesn't mean that it's not a good idea, and that someday it might be something that we engage in again.
The current headlines about the status of HealthNet as an organization, and they're facing some budget difficulties, and the homeless population that we're serving in the community, and that's part of the conversation. The whole homeless population issue, is that a county responsibility? Is it a city responsibility? Is it a shared responsibility? Who really is going to deal with that?
It's a shared responsibility. I mean, we've been working hand in glove with the county and our social service partners to try to help as best we can. One of the things I always talk about when it comes to homeless is it's not criminal to be homeless, right? So it's not a arrest your way out of it type of issue. It's not, you do one thing, all you're going to do is move the problem to a different area. It's really a holistic approach that you have to take to those sorts of issues, and it requires all hands on deck. There's an issue that's not going away, and it's also a critical housing issue. I've been talking to the folks in Janesville about the fact is that we need all forms of housing in the city, from low and moderate income all the way up to the highest level of housing, or what we call executive housing within the city. But in particular around this issue, around the homeless issue, is that there isn't things that people can afford or that are accessible. And so I'm proud of some of the partnerships that we've done with folks like ECHO recently, where we've had some tax foreclosure houses that we've been able to turn over to them that for traditional housing, but it's an all hands on deck issue.
Josh?
Yeah, I mean, another good answer by Kevin. I don't have much to add. I think we think about the root causes of homelessness. I think that's where the county comes in a little bit. Homeless clients are typically our clients in other arenas, whether it's human services, folks getting mental health services from us is a good example. Folks who might need economic support help from us, where we determine their eligibility for badger care and food stamps, those kinds of things. I think one of the hard things sometimes the homeless population is they're not as engaged as some of our other clients about coming in to see us. And so, it is kind of patchwork sometimes where we're trying to provide motel vouchers to some of our clients to keep them off the streets at certain times of the year. But yeah, it is one of those intractable issues that's been a big challenge.
If you were to take the general fund budgets of every municipality in Rock County and add them together, you would collectively come up just shy of the amount of money the County of Rock spends on an annual basis in their budget. And it's a fair statement to say that about 50% of the county's spending is directed towards human services programming.
Yeah, certainly Health and Human Services is our largest area. Human Services Department is our largest department. On an FTE basis, the county has, it's like 1,350 FTE, say, 400 of some of those are human services employees, just to give you a magnitude of scale of people. Right, so it is, and there's another indicator of the breadth of things that we do. That you mentioned.
It's another one of those that there isn't necessarily an easy solution, but it's one of those that requires all hands on deck to try and address, correct, for the homeless
Exactly.
and human services in general. Priorities, and it relates to that question there. How many times has the city appeared in front of the county board to request funding assistance for issues of the homelessness in Janesville, whereas they've appeared before the county board asking for funding for other projects?
Well, maybe I'll start with that one.
Go ahead.
I think the difference is like individual projects, right? And so, talking about the Woodman Center here as an example of when Kevin came in front of the county board. And again, the reason he came is because I had put that in the budget to see have something that I thought that the county board should discuss. But the difference is, on one-time projects like that, and we've seen a lot of one-time projects really because of the federal ARPA money that has been, and we can certainly talk more about that and some of the good things that we're all doing with that money. But the difference is on issues like day-to-day issues like homelessness or intervention services for clients or law enforcement services or court. We're talking about those things, not even at our level, like at a staff level every day. And it doesn't, like if Kevin were to come in front of the city, in front of the county board and start talking about some of those issues, people would kind of look at each other like, well, obviously Josh is not doing his job because like Kevin's here to, so those are things that we do deal with on a regular basis that you would expect to see in front of the county board in that way, I think.
One of the biggest projects going forward in the county level this past year has been the law enforcement center. And that's a project that's slightly a hair under $100 million. I think it represents the largest public works project undertaken in a zillion years. What's the prognosis? When do we come to a project that's ready to open its doors and we can share it with the public?
Yeah, so the timeline is that around the middle of the year we expect that project to be done. There obviously will be some punch list type things that get done, but largely middle of the year, let's call it third quarter, maybe we expect that to open up and be finished with construction. I think it has been a sort of a lightning rod for a lot of people based on the cost, based on kind of going back to our discussion earlier today from our friends at school districts, like, well, why aren't we putting that money into the schools instead of into the sheriff's office and the jail? Legitimate question. Believe me, I've been asked that question a number of times. And, there's no great answer that's satisfying. I think the things that I would just remind people that, now years ago when this prior sheriff started talking about trying to, why do we need to do this? There are benefits and there are things that were just, the building that we were replacing was from the 1920s and the radio equipment was in the basement which leaked and then the drywall was all moldy and there's things like that we tried to address for years and years and we just couldn't and we just needed to get them out of that building. But there's also some benefits from the new building. We didn't have good programming space really, other than we have the successful recap program, but we're going to expand our programming space so people who are in the jail can get not only sort of like the programming they need on alcohol and drug addiction, but actually some treatment. We have some grants that we're using in jail now for that. So we'll expand that, and hopefully that results in better outcomes when people get out. So there's lots of reasons why I could talk about that being a positive thing in the community, but certainly a lot of attention.
A lot of folk in the community said that project kind of snuck up on them. It was not talked about, it was not publicized, and then suddenly the county was asking to build what was at the time a $96 million project. And there were complaints that the community hadn't been involved, and there were issues. vastly expanding the jail, and you and I both know that it's not a jail expansion. It was one of those that snuck up on the public. That goes back to that equation of citizen participation early on. In that project, what would you have done differently, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I think just, in hindsight, the complaint, as you said, Rich, was that people didn't know about it. And so, as an administrator at the time, we were going about our daily business as we had before for lots of different things, right? The agendas are public, the minutes are public. We had tours. The sheriff had tours that he was giving of the jail to show people. And so, yes, publicize it more. More communication, I think, would have been helpful in hindsight. But at the time,
Yeah. Well, you and I both cut our teeth on creating alternative programs to jail expansion, and that was a joint venture that you and I got to know each other almost too well in some of those things. And this particular project is not a jail expansion. And it was never really explained that it wasn't a jail expansion. And some people automatically looked at it as this must be they're finally exploding and they're going to make that jail 1,000 beds as opposed to the 425 that it is today. And that's not the case at all. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got the Woodman Sports and Convention Center that has been talked about in the public for a long time. And every gyration that you can possibly take with the project, it's been talked about on every different angle that you can talk about it. Different ways to approach similar big public works projects. $100 million on this end and $50 million on the city end. Is there a right way to do these things from a citizen participation perspective, or is there a wrong way? And I throw into that the caveat that in Wisconsin, you guys as counties and cities don't have to go out for a referendum like the school district does. And the school district has to really get out into the community and make the case. And they're totally dependent upon the community saying yay or nay. What's the middle ground? Is there one? You're walking in on an interesting circumstance.
Everything that happened with the Woodman Center up until today, was the benefit of everybody else that worked on that project before me, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for the approach that they took. They did meticulous studies about the project. They talked about it in the community. It truly is a public-private partnership like no other. So the city of Janesville is getting a $50 million asset for the city investment of $20 million. And the private sector investment in that is remarkable. It's going to be $9 million when it's all said and done. And I think that we should be proud of that. And it's going to be a huge asset that's going to provide benefits to the city for years and years to come. And so I think that type of process is very good. And I think that any sort of large-scale investment, you should be having serious community conversations about it. The other thing too that I was just mentioned is that folks don't like to admit it, but buildings have a life, and a building that's built in the 1920s has a huge detriment when it comes to modern technology and things like that, and we just have to accept that. And it's not because of lack of maintenance or lack of regard for the building or whatever. The cost, at a certain point, the cost of renovation far exceeds the cost of new construction, and you do that evaluation and you determine what the best asset is. Schools have a lot of old assets that they have to deal with, that they deal with every day. So I think that it's important to have conversations about those major projects, and I think that we should look at the Woodman Center as a real success story for the amount of engagement that came in. And at the end of the day, and I talked to you about this when we were on the radio together, the value of the Janesville Mall today is $10 million. 10 years ago, it was $30 million. And if you want to just let the public sector take care, or the private sector take care of it, it will be long and slow, and you'll have an eyesore on your hands for years to come. And just look around at any empty mall in the state of Wisconsin or in the United States and see what's happening there. And go and walk through uptown the mall today and see what's going on. because it will be an eyesore for years and years to come. So you need to do something. And I also would say that there's an empirical example. Go up to Brookfield Square Mall. It was a dying mall that the city put in, the county put investment in to put in a convention center, and the amount of investment immediately around that entire area has just taken off. And it's a very similar example, and I encourage you to drive up there and take a look, because these types of things work, and they're going to work in Janesville.
And just for clarity's sake, you're not replacing a 1920s building. Josh is doing it.
Yes, he is.
And it's always intriguing, because when you do these things in public, then you get put into a situation where you have to answer all of those questions that come hand in hand with doing those things in public. And there's so many of them that you are in a position to answer that'd be a topic of another show all in and of itself. By golly, if you were to look at where we are with that project as of this moment in time, the community is out there waiting for bids to come in on December 22nd, and then sometime in January, based upon what those bids are, the city council's supposed to do something. And the first question that comes to mind is, we don't have any financing lined up yet, so that decision has to be made at some point. There's a lot of things that when you do it in public, you have to talk about it. And that makes it challenging. There's a balancing act. It makes your job hard. It makes your job very hard.
It's interesting. That's interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I have to agree with you 110%. You either grow or you die.
Yes,
And
exactly.
the example that we used to use a lot in city manager, county manager school was, you either grow or you become a Bodie, California, which is probably one of the most famous ghost towns that you're going to find anywhere in the globe. And when the city grows, the county grows, and what's good for the city is good for the county. And that begs the question of where are we at with a number of major projects in the city that we'd love to learn more about. And you're caught in that dilemma of what can I talk about versus what I can. And you got the same issue, Josh. And it goes back to, I guess, to my beginning where we started this thing. How do you get information out, the right information out, to the community in a timely fashion so that they feel like they have some sense of understanding, at least, of the priorities that you're following? And how do you get them involved in the decision-making process? And we've just got a couple of minutes left, so I'll start with you, Kevin, and give me some specifics. How do you fix what I think is a broken system?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of things you can do. I think, number one, we're using all the tools that we can, and that includes our own social media, our own newsletters, our own sorts of things, and that sort of thing. I think that's important. I think that we have to engage with our city elected members, to use them to talk to the folks that they know, because they're usually fairly prominent people that have long histories in the community that are connected, and you encourage them to have those sorts of conversations. I think that you have to create forums and workshops when the time allows to do it, and a long history of doing that. I think that there's a variety of ways that you can do it. You do use the traditional media when you can. I think we're very fortunate, I do have to say, I think we're very fortunate to have a local radio station that covers local things that I know that I'm tuned into, and so I think those are all the sorts of levers that you have to pull. But it's incredibly difficult because you got to meet people where they're at, and you have to try innovative things. I've done things where we've set up budget workshops in a coffee shop, right? And because it's Wisconsin, nobody came. But if you do a budget workshop with beer, then all of a sudden a lot of folks show up. And so you can do innovative things like that.
I've got a minister friend that does just that. It's called Beer in the Bible.
There you go. Yeah, it's a great hook. I think that you can do other different forums. I'm working on a public forum that we're going to be rolling out here in the new year as well. And I think that you just got to you really got to just try to check every box as best as you possibly can and break through the noise. And I think I'm really happy that we have a really good creative team. I'm excited to see what they can unleash with those.
Breaking through the noise is a challenge.
Yep.
It's a real challenge. Josh?
Yeah, I don't know have anything to add that we already talked about. So just that, yeah, it's something we've struggled with. I acknowledge that, and all things Kevin said. We're certainly going to try to steal those things. But yeah, it's something that we just continue to work on.
It's a perpetual problem, and there's no easy solution to it. The last word, I guess, the love letter's coming. We're going to get it here real quick. What's your sage advice going forward? What should I be excited about in the city of Janesville, Kevin? And what should I be excited about in the county of Rock, Josh?
Well, I think that the city of Janesville is just an incredibly dynamic place. It has an incredible support from the business community like no other. I've talked about that in all the forums I've been in. The connection between the business community and the city and the community as a whole is just absolutely incredible. We feel very well supported here. I think that we continue to improve and create opportunities for connection in our downtown with different public events and then continued investment. And I think that you can look forward to exciting redevelopment opportunities and new development opportunities in 2024, as well as continued investment in housing.
Josh?
As I said earlier, I think sometimes the county is best when you don't hear about it. There's no questions, when there's nothing going on that doesn't make you wonder what's going on. So, some of the things that I think I point to for 2024 are things that aren't necessarily always within the county's purview. And so I mentioned before the ARPA money, the American Rescue Plan, federal monies for COVID relief and response and recovery that came in. And the county board has approved several projects that are going to gear up in 2024, $4.5 million for affordable housing. And I think that gets back to the point that you made earlier that, I think the county board understands that the county overall does well when our underlying jurisdictions do well. And so affordable housing is not something the county does, and yet we see that's a priority. And so affordable housing, child care grant, there's going to be a little retooling of the small business grant program to get those funds out. Broadband is another thing that the county board is going to be looking to get more money to broadband. We've already put some into broadband, but again, that's not a county program or something that benefits Rock County government. That's something that benefits the community and that the county board has prioritized. So there's several projects like that we'll be seeing in 2024. We're trying to bring to closure over the course of the year. And again, that speaks back to a point that you made earlier about collaboration and working with everybody to try to make sure that we're not duplicating those things, but working together to try to make things best for our community.
My wish for 2024 for both of you and your organizations is you do everything in your power to be transparent, to be accountable, and to get people involved, because that's what makes the community a strong community going forward. So thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Josh. Pleasure always to have you guys. We will continue our conversation for those that are interested. Thursday morning or Thursday afternoons at 2 o'clock, we have a debriefing, as it were. We continue the conversation in Havana Coffee, and you're welcome to join us if you're in the neighborhood. Gentlemen, again, thank you very much, and we will be announcing plans for January shows. We're going to take the rest of the month to enjoy the holidays, and I wish each and every one of you that same opportunity. Take the month and enjoy the holidays and make your community special. Get informed, get involved, and you can make a difference. Thanks. Good night.